Incorruptible, Eric Ries, book summary. Why good companies go bad, and how great companies stay great. The thesis that changes everything. I've spent years in operations watching great companies drift, slowly, then suddenly, away from the values that made them great. Eric Ries finally gave me the framework to understand why. His answer isn't what most people expect. It's not people who fail organizations. It's systems. The conventional explanation for corporate corruption points to greedy executives, moral weakness, or bad hires. Ries dismantles that with evidence. Enron had world-class talent selection. Theranos had former secretaries of state on its board. WeWork attracted the smartest investors on the planet. None of that mattered because the institutional architecture was broken. You cannot build an incorruptible company by hiring incorruptible people. You have to design a system where integrity is the path of least resistance, not the path of greatest resistance. Idea 1. Success is the trap. The most counterintuitive insight in the book, success itself is the primary trigger of organizational corruption. Here's the mechanism. When a company is small, culture transmits by osmosis, incentives are non-monetary, and the founder touches every decision. Then capital arrives. The team grows from 10 to 1,000. Stock options start representing real money. KP is shift from measuring learning to measuring revenue. Every layer of growth introduces new incentive structures that slowly misalign individual behavior from collective mission. WeWork is the case study. Adam Neumann wasn't a fraud from day one. He was genuinely visionary. But when SoftBank injected $4.4 billion at an inflated valuation, the system rewarded burning cash, expanding recklessly, and concentrating power. Neumann responded rationally to the incentives the system created. The collapse was structural, not personal. Idea 2. The 4 systems that determine everything. Ries identifies 4 structural systems that determine whether an organization stays intact over time. 1. Ownership and governance. Who holds real power, not org chart power? The ability to stop a bad decision, replace a leader, or protect the mission when short-term pressure hits. Dual-class share structures can enable long-term thinking, but concentrated power with no checks creates fragility. 2. Incentive structure. People don't do what they say they'll do. They do what their incentives reward. Temporal misalignment, rewarding quarterly results while consequences land years later, is the silent killer of organizational integrity. 3. Multidimensional accountability. One-dimensional accountability to shareholders only is structurally corrupting. The German co-determination model, benefit corporation structures, and independent mission audits create the checks that declarations of values never can. 4. Decision architecture. How is power actually used day to day? Incorruptible organizations define which decisions are reversible versus irreversible, create formal channels for structured dissent, and document the reasoning behind decisions, not just the outcomes. Idea 3. Successful versus durable. This is the distinction that cuts deepest for me as an operations professional. A successful company hits impressive numbers for 5 or 10 years. A durable company preserves its mission, integrity, and capacity to create real value across decades through leadership changes and market disruptions. The cases Ries studies reveal a pattern. Patagonia didn't survive 50 years of environmental commitment because Yvon Chouinard was especially virtuous. He transferred ownership to a trust structure that makes it literally impossible for a future leader to sell it to investors with different objectives. Berkshire Hathaway's decentralized holding structure and long-horizon incentives produce ethical consistency as a byproduct of design. The Mondragon cooperatives align employee and organizational interests structurally, not aspirationally. The common thread: none of these companies relies on personal virtue as the primary integrity mechanism. All of them engineered systems where integrity is the default output, not the heroic exception. Idea 4. The founder as legislator. The dominant cultural narrative casts founders as visionary heroes, people whose will and genius pull the organization into the future. Ries respects that, but identifies its structural flaw. Companies dependent on the personal virtue of one exceptional leader are exactly as fragile as that leader. The alternative is what he calls the founder as legislator. Instead of asking, "How do I make better decisions?" the question becomes, "How do I design systems that make good decisions even when I'm wrong, when I'm gone, or when circumstances change beyond what my original vision anticipated?" Madison put it cleanly: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Durable institutions aren't designed for angels. They're designed to function with imperfect humans. That's the job. Write the organizational constitution while the company is small and values are easy to maintain. Design the board as a real accountability mechanism, not a rubber stamp. Create ownership structures aligned with the mission's time horizon. Build for succession from day one. A company that can't survive its founder isn't a company. It's an extension of one person's ego. Idea 5. Ethics as engineering. The final and deepest argument: organizational ethics should be treated not as a values problem, but as an engineering design problem. When a bridge collapses, we analyze the structural failure and redesign the system. When a company collapses, we look for the villain. Ries's long-term stock exchange, LTSE, is proof of concept, a real SEC-registered stock exchange where listing companies commit to longer investor voting horizons, long-term performance metrics, and multi-stakeholder governance. It's not theory. It's a live experiment showing that market rules can be redesigned. The CEO who makes short-term decisions isn't necessarily greedy or short-sighted. They're responding rationally to the incentive architecture they operate within. Change the architecture, and you change the behavior without changing the people. The bottom line: most leadership books tell you how to be a better leader. Incorruptible asks a different question. What kind of institution are you building? Not what kind of leader do you want to be, but what kind of system will you leave behind when you're wrong, when you're gone, when the pressure is highest? If you lead anything, a team, a department, a company, read this before your next governance decision. Ejecutivo Digital AI. Ejecutivo Digital AI. Dirige con inteligencia. Escala sin límites.